Here I go again, wishing upon a star. Hey yo, hey, wishing for my one and only to come and save me from my lonely days. Hey yo, hey yo, hey, hey yo, hey yo, hey. Here I go again, wishing upon a star. Hey yo, hey, wishing for my one and only to come and save me from.
I know a couple of my grandparents were in a residential school, but I never really asked any questions about it.
I know that my grandmother and grandfather, my grandfather was a survivor.
And traumas that have occurred in somebody's life, then that experience from that individual's trauma gets passed down through their children. And then the trauma that's experienced from that child gets passed on down to their children as well, in different forms usually.
I think it's still about maybe 90 to 95% of the generational impacts. Even us being in the urban setting, we haven't escaped from, we left the reserves, but we're trying to make a life here. I still feel those generational impacts in my life, even though I've been clean and sober for 33 years, even though I have a mortgage, even though I have a pet, I have everything that should categorize me as equal to any other Canadian, but I'm not. Whatever I do will never be enough to society out there. So I'm still struggling with those residential school impacts. Even it wasn't, those treatment homes really made them seem like they were the ones that were the horrible children, when really it was the environment that they were living in, the residential school environment of what their parents or their parents or their grandparents learned in the residential school, all that sexual stuff and all that torture and the way that they were brought up and the lack of emotion. So that's what's being passed on from generation to generation. Those are generational impacts that we feel today, and we don't talk about that enough in the communities on the reserves, because if you were to disclose that this person did this to me, you would be ostracized, you would be thrown out of the community, you would have to leave, because, oh, you can't say that about uncle, oh, you can't say that about, he never did that, you're lying. So you're made to be a victim again within your own community. So it's not really talked about, all these stuff that the residential schools did to our people, to our parents, to our uncles, to our aunties. It's really hidden, and those generational impacts are still carried onto the children, to the grandchildren, and alcohol and drugs are the main source as well to be able to keep that going.
So on both sides of my families, there's addiction. On one side, there's alcoholism, and the other side, there's drugs. So on both sides. I think I was 20. That's when I learned about intergenerational trauma. That's when I found out what people in residential schools had gone through. That's when I realized, well, maybe my bio mom isn't just a drunk after all. Maybe there was a reason behind her pain. And before, it was all this like anger, how could she leave me? Why did she leave me? Why doesn't she love me enough to come and take care of me? Why can't she not do the drugs? And I think that's when I learned about the pain, because I was never explained about the residential schools in a way that I could understand, and being in that room, seeing the elders talk, seeing and feeling the pain on their face, I think that really just that really opened up so many questions that I had, that I think the big question I asked for years and years and years is, why did my parents do what they did? Why did they leave me? Why did it seem to come so easily to them? And I think going there, I think it was like a 2-3 day event, that's when I learned that they didn't have it easy. They their parents were raised by their parents. Their parents had gone through her in residential schools and unspeakable things, and then that's why they turned to drugs and alcohol. and that's why. And so we have babies raising babies, and we have the foster care system who it's not working, and it's because we're not explaining to youth why we are hurting. It's a hurt that, you know, I felt for many years, and I didn't have a word for it. You know, it's a hurt that I could feel, but there was no words to describe it. You know, it was a distinct longing for something, and I could never understand until that day when I learned that word. And it's kind of like that word. Once that word was explained to me, it didn't make everything go away and better, but it helped, knowing that is why I am hurting, that is why they were hurting. It made sense.
The most is that I interact a lot with people who have a number of things that they're dealing with, whether that be their parents were survivors of residential schools, whether their family grew up in poverty, whether they experienced abuse themselves, whether they were a victim of identity loss. There's a number of different things that kind of come into play with intergenerational trauma, in my opinion, and it manifests in a number of different ways. We have people who describe feeling lost. We have people who can't seem to break out of those cycles of addiction, of poverty, of feeling like violence is okay and normal. People that drift towards violence in their lives because that's comfortable and that's something that they know and that's safer to them than stability and the unknown, I guess. They've never lived something that's traumatic and chaotic and stressful.
My mother hit us. Her parents hit her. I can only speak that far back. And I'm not too sure what kind of lifestyle my grandparents lived, but I know that my mom was abused and she was beaten and she was sexually exploited. So now she brought that down to us.
People understanding truly what intergenerational trauma is instead of being dismissive to it. You get people that kind of roll their eyes and say, yeah, we've heard it again and again and whatever. But that's, I think, one of the gaps is that, yeah, we hear it again, but it's one of those things that, have we really changed what we're doing? Are we really actually acknowledging what we're doing and how we can make a difference?
It's like generation deep, that sexual abuse, and it really breaks my heart that my kids were exposed to it.
You can't not see it. If you're looking, you see it.
All right. And like they can't get out of, you know, of what happened to them, and it's sad. It's so sad.
I guess I would call it trauma that is obviously a deep kind of trauma that is passed on to the generation that follows, and I think usually because of sociocultural dynamics that trauma doesn't get addressed. Essentially trauma, everyone experiences trauma. Everyone in the world experiences trauma, and it's not like trauma and no trauma, it's a spectrum. And when trauma is significant, it leaves lasting impacts. And if there isn't a sociocultural or community environment within which that trauma can get properly processed and healed, the natural dynamic is that it just gets passed on to the generations that follow. And so I know that in a lot of Native culture, they talk about 7 generations of trauma. And I don't personally subscribe to that necessarily. I think it takes time, and depending on the kind of supports that are in place, less time is needed. If there's more support, if there's more opportunity for healing and integration, it may not take 7 generations. And if there's none of that support, it may take more than 7 generations.
On the reserves, I think 100% of the people are still experiencing generational impacts. There's a lot of incest, there's a lot of sexual abuse, there's a lot of mental, there's a lot of lateral violence, there's a lot of favoritism, there's a lot of everything is there. Even the water is not drinkable. Everything, it's like a third world country.
I don't have the specific numbers, but I would say it's probably between 80 and 90%.
I would say for the street kids,
Yeah.
A good 70-75%.
I think it's still about maybe 90 to 95% of the generational impacts. Even us being in the urban setting, we haven't escaped from, we left the reserves, but we're trying to make a life here. I still feel those generational impacts in my life, even though I've been clean and sober for 33 years, even though I have a mortgage, even though I have a pet, I have everything that should categorize me as equal to any other Canadian, but I'm not. Whatever I do will never be enough to society out there. So I'm still struggling with those residential school impacts. Even
it affects them 100%, probably 150%. You know, like it's people need to heal that pain and that suffering that the abused ones feel. Like even the parents, like yes, like the kids are our generation now. The children are more screwed up than they were the generation before. They're all meth addicts now. They're 10, 11, 12. They're on the streets and they're selling their bodies. And parents are like selling their children for drugs. So like there's a lot of pain and there's a lot of abuse and there's a lot of corrupt things going on with society that that people like are just so absent-minded to. They just judge and they point fingers, but they don't really understand the pain that everybody is feeling and everybody is like suffering with and struggling with. Like I myself, I lost my mind after my sister died.
that's how they killed the Indian and the child.
Looking for my family when I was 12, and then when I came into that environment to find my family, they were all drinking and they were all doing drugs, and it was the cool thing, and it was the only way you could fit in and to actually get along and be able to open up with them and let yourself go is if you were drinking and doing drugs with them. So I was only 12 years old and I started drinking alcohol, and I was addicted by the time I was 13.
We started getting into drugs and alcohol, and it kind of just led from one thing to another.
I have their medicine to cope with their pain always took precedence over the needs of. You know, I followed suit with what was role modeled in my home. Like, so I started using and drinking at a very, very young age. You know, I was a young girl on, you know, the street, and I did what young women on the street had to do to survive, you know, and to feed my own addictions, because that's how I was coping with my own pain, you know. And I did that for a long time, back and forth. I'd go back and I just couldn't stand it there anymore, couldn't stand to see the way they were hurting themselves and how that was impacting me, and I'd leave again, right? So I struggled with my ability to, you know, in relationships, you know, my own ability to love. What I correlated love with really has nothing to do with healthy love, you know. And my ability to parent. I struggled with addictions for a long, long time. So I have a 20-year-old who I'm clean and sober now and have been for a few years, but you know, it wasn't always that way, not for his whole life. So, I mean, I was emotionally unavailable. There were people that I brought into the home that, you know, put him at risk, you know. His education was affected because I wasn't able to get him to school. You know, our relationship has been a long road of repair to be able to earn that trust, you know, and for him to be able to, and it's impacted him. He struggles with anxiety, you know, he's struggling with keeping commitments and going to school and that kind of thing. So, I mean, that's a long lineage. That's a lot of information in a nutshell, but it speaks to, you know, how many generations. Just my parents, myself, and now my children.
But he was an addict. He was a cocaine addict, and he was an alcoholic, and he was a womanizer. My mom, she struggled with you know, bad relationships, with addictions, with the abuse that she suffered as a child, and then she, like, you know, she started abusing her children and started drinking as a way to self-medicate and gambling in them. Like this kid, these children of ours, my children, like my alcohol and like my drug addictions and my life of crime affected them so much to the point where they're emotionally, like, they're hurt inside, and they feel abandoned, and they have abandonment issues, and I don't know. 100% of my family have been involved in gangs. I grew up drinking really young. I got addicted to drugs and alcohol when I was 12. So I was going to little outings with other children in the city. Like, there was a lot of us all the time, and everybody was drinking, everybody was doing drugs, everybody was smoking and running away from their parents or from foster homes, and we were clicking together and hanging out together because we bonded, because we suffered the same emotional trauma. They searched for protection and for safety and for love. So, belonging, to belong and to fit in and to be loved and to belong, I don't know, to belong to something. The lifestyle is addicting. Like, it's addicting. You're known. you're somebody in a gang. You're somebody in that lifestyle. You mean something. You have power in that lifestyle. You have somewhat of respect and like what you don't usually have in the normal society, because you're looking at this drunk, this alcoholic, this slut, this dirty Indian, and like in normal society that's not good enough, not smart enough, and just another statistics that's gonna wind up dead. They just look down on you in society, and that's how it is. I tried really hard to live a normal life. I did. Like, I struggled. They make you feel like you belong and that you are worthy to be with them. They have the same issues, so you don't feel like you're out of place. They comfort you. They take you in. They love you. They give you a sense of belonging, and they give you an identity you never had growing in and out of the system and with your parents and living everywhere. They give you an identity. They give you a name. They give you a sense of pride. They give you a sense of belonging. They give you protection that from people like being abused and being hurt throughout your childhood. They offer you protection and then love. I went to university and I took a class, and it was on Native Studies, and I had to drop the course because of the stories that we had to read and the bitter truth of like what those young children went through, like getting pregnant at age 10 and having to birth these babies that were fathered by priests, and then smashing those babies against the wall right at birth in front of those 10-year-olds and 11-year-olds and 12-year-olds. Like, just that's enough to fuck up a person for life, and couldn't be felt, I think, within generations to come, because that's harsh. Okay. Yes, they were abused. They were abused by their parents. They were abused by uncles and aunts and cousins. My dad was even raped also. There's 11 of us. There's 10 now because one passed away. We all were sexually abused, and we were all physically abused, and we were beaten up by our aunties and uncles and mother, like we were like men, like their size. So we got some pretty wicked beatings as children. Get the help. How do these parents even know what's like bothering them and what they need to like fix if they don't know? They don't know that beatings and sexual abuse is not normal. They don't know that. They think that it's normal because, oh, it happened to my mom, it happened to my auntie, it happened to my cousin. So that's like, it's a common thing. So people just think, oh, well, but really they don't really understand like how much problems and trauma it causes the person, and like the abandonment. Like, my parents abandoned us because they were abandoned too as children, and because of drugs and alcohol and their beatings. And I thought of my kids being lost in the system. I thought of my kids growing up without a mother because she'd be in jail. I thought of my children feeling the loneliness I felt when I grew up in the system. The abandonment issues I deal with, the psychological damage that being in the system caused me. I never felt like I belonged anywhere. I never felt like I was safe. I never felt like anybody loved me, and that I was worth anything. I never got the hugs and kisses that you were supposed to get when you're a child. I never got that. I'm mad about sexual abuse, and it hurts considering that I tried so hard to protect my children from people abusing my kids.
Dad passed in 2011, he committed suicide in my grandma's home. And my little sisters were the ones to find him. He didn't want us learning his language.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't specifically tell me why, but he did tell me that he didn't want us speaking his language, and that we were only allowed to speak English.
The secret, they were ashamed. You know, like I didn't grow up in a traditional way. My dad was, he hated the fact that he was Native, and he often tried to hide it. You know, when we...
In homes where I went to school, they were like, "You dirty Indian, all you Indians should die. And what are you doing here? Are you smoking Lysol? Your parents threw you away because you're ugly and you're not loved." I was the Native kid from the dirty reserve. I already had those core beliefs that I was not good enough and I was ugly and I was worthless due to all these awesome living arrangements that my parents had and that child welfare had. So I was already screwed up. I was already an addict by age 12 because I was so poorly treated as a child. And I got help instead. And I don't feel those feelings anymore. I don't want people to feel what I feel. The way he behaved, he was also raped from other men in his family. So he had a lot of anger, and he had a lot of hurt, and he had a lot of problems. And so it's just tough. It's really tough to like point fingers and blame people, and it's just generations full of blaming and pointing that, you know, and just like blame this person, blame my parents, you know, and it's just like I just want people to start healing people instead of responding and trying to bring justice. You want to bring justice, heal the hurt, broken people and unhealthy people.
Here I go again, wishing upon a star. Hey, oh, hey, wishing for my one and only to come and save me from my lonely days. Hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, hey, hey,